Greetings and welcome back to Daily Tales, where we bring you the most fascinating and bone-chilling true crime stories from around the world. As always, we've scoured the archives to bring you a tale that will leave you on the edge of your seat, so sit back, relax, and get ready to be transported into the dark and twisted world of true crime. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most infamous in the history of American true crime. Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, was a serial killer who murdered and dismembered 17 young men over the course of several years. His crimes were gruesome, shocking, and deeply disturbing, and they continue to captivate and horrify people to this day. Dahmer's case sparked a national conversation about mental illness, criminal justice, and societal attitudes towards marginalized communities. His victims were largely young gay men who had been stigmatized and marginalized by society, and their deaths were a tragic reminder of the impact of hate and discrimination. Despite the controversy and complexity surrounding Dahmer's case, it remains one of the most significant and chilling examples of true crime in American history. In this video, we will delve into the details of Dahmer's crimes, explore the legacy of his case, and reflect on the lessons we can learn from this disturbing chapter in our history.
Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. From a young age, Jeffrey showed signs of being withdrawn and introverted, often preferring to play alone rather than with other children. His parents' marriage was strained, and his mother suffered from mental illness, including depression and anxiety. This often left Jeffrey feeling isolated and unsupported at home. Despite his difficulties at home, Jeffrey performed well in school, achieving good grades and showing an aptitude for science. However, he struggled to make friends and was often bullied by other children. His parents recognized his social difficulties and attempted to provide support and guidance, but they were often unsuccessful in reaching him. As Jeffrey entered adolescence, he became increasingly withdrawn and distant from his family. He began to exhibit odd behavior, such as collecting roadkill and dissecting the animals in his family's backyard. He also became interested in pornography and began to fantasize about having complete control over another person. Throughout his teenage years, Jeffrey's behavior became more concerning. He developed a drinking problem and was arrested for disorderly conduct on several occasions. He also began to experiment with drugs and frequently skipped school. Despite his struggles, Jeffrey was accepted into Ohio State University, but his poor academic performance and drinking habits led to his expulsion after one semester. Jeffrey's parents attempted to intervene in his life by sending him to live with his grandmother in Wisconsin. However, this did little to address the underlying issues that were driving his behavior. He continued to drink heavily and was arrested for indecent exposure in 1982. As Jeffrey entered his early 20s, he became increasingly fascinated with the idea of controlling and possessing another person. His fantasies grew more elaborate and violent, and he began to act on them. In 1978, he picked up a hitchhiker and attempted to strangle him in a hotel room. The victim was able to escape, and Jeffrey was charged with assault. However, his charm and good behavior in court allowed him to avoid jail time. Despite this close call, Jeffrey continued to commit increasingly violent acts. He began to lure men to his apartment, where he would drug them and sexually assault them before murdering them. His crimes continued until his arrest in 1991, and he ultimately confessed to 17 murders. Looking back on Jeffrey's childhood, it is clear that he experienced significant challenges and trauma that contributed to his violent behavior. While his actions cannot be excused or justified, it is important to recognize the impact of his environment and experiences on his development. Understanding these factors can help us to identify warning signs and intervene before it is too late. As Jeffrey Dahmer entered his teenage years, he struggled to fit in with his peers and became increasingly isolated. He continued to struggle with his drinking and drug use, often skipping school to pursue his habits. His parents attempted to intervene by sending him to counseling and therapy, but these efforts were unsuccessful in addressing his underlying issues. Despite his struggles, Jeffrey was able to hold down a job at a local chocolate factory and began to develop an interest in photography. He would often spend his evenings and weekends taking pictures around town, and he even enrolled in a photography class at a local college. However, Jeffrey's fascination with control and possession continued to grow, and he began to act on his violent fantasies. In 1987, he picked up a hitchhiker and brought him back to his apartment, where he drugged and assaulted him before letting him go. He repeated this pattern with several other victims, escalating to murder as his fantasies became more violent and depraved. Throughout his early adulthood, Jeffrey continued to spiral out of control. He lost his job at the chocolate factory and was arrested for a variety of offenses, including disorderly conduct, indecent exposure, and sexual assault. Despite these warning signs, Jeffrey was able to avoid serious consequences due to his charm and manipulation of the legal system. However, Jeffrey's luck eventually ran out. In 1991, he was arrested for the murder of one of his victims, and police discovered evidence of his other crimes in his apartment. Jeffrey ultimately confessed to 17 murders and was sentenced to life in prison. Looking back on Jeffrey's teenage years and early adulthood, it is clear that he was struggling with a variety of issues, including addiction, social isolation, and violent fantasies. While there were warning signs of his violent behavior, these were often overlooked or dismissed by those around him. It is important to recognize the impact of mental illness and social isolation on individuals like Jeffrey, and to provide early intervention and support to prevent violent behavior from escalating. Jeffrey Dahmer's killing spree in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, began in the late 1980s and continued until his arrest in 1991. During this time, he lured young men to his apartment, where he would drug them, sexually assault them, and murder them. Dahmer's first victim was Stephen Hicks, a hitchhiker he picked up in Ohio in 1978. However, it wasn't until several years later that he began to escalate to murder. His second victim was a 14-year-old boy named James Dockstader, whom he lured to his apartment in 1987. Dahmer drugged and strangled Dockstader, then dismembered his body and scattered the remains in the woods. Over the next few years, Dahmer's killing spree continued, with him murdering a total of 15 more young men. He developed a routine for his crimes, luring his victims to his apartment with the promise of money or alcohol, then drugging them and sexually assaulting them. He would then kill his victims by strangling them, sometimes dismembering their bodies and disposing of the remains in various ways. Despite the gruesome nature of his crimes, Dahmer was able to avoid detection for several years. He was arrested on several occasions for various offenses, but was able to manipulate the legal system and avoid serious consequences. He was also able to maintain a facade of normalcy, living in an apartment complex and interacting with his neighbors and co-workers. However, Dahmer's luck eventually ran out. In 1991, one of his victims managed to escape and alerted the police. When they arrived at Dahmer's apartment, they discovered a grisly scene: body parts in the refrigerator, a human head in the freezer, and various tools and chemicals used to dispose of the remains. Dahmer ultimately confessed to 17 murders and was sentenced to life in prison. His killing spree in Milwaukee shocked the nation and highlighted the importance of early intervention and detection of violent behavior. Looking back on Dahmer's murders, it is clear that his escalating behavior was a warning sign of his violent tendencies. However, these signs were often overlooked or dismissed, allowing him to continue his crimes for several years. It is important to recognize the importance of early intervention and support in preventing violent behavior from escalating, and to take warning signs seriously to protect potential victims. After years of evading detection, Jeffrey Dahmer's luck finally ran out in July 1991. One of his intended victims, a 32-year-old man named Tracy Edwards, managed to escape from Dahmer's apartment and flagged down 2 police officers. When they arrived at Dahmer's apartment, they discovered a scene of horror: human remains in a refrigerator and freezer, as well as a collection of gruesome artifacts. Dahmer was taken into custody and quickly confessed to his crimes, admitting to killing 17 young men over the course of several years. He cooperated with police, providing them with detailed descriptions of his murders and his methods of disposing of the bodies. Dahmer's trial began in January 1992 and lasted for several weeks. The prosecution presented a wealth of evidence, including eyewitness testimony from one of Dahmer's intended victims, as well as forensic evidence linking him to the murders. The defense, led by attorney Gerald Boyle, argued that Dahmer was not guilty by reason of insanity, citing his history of mental illness and his bizarre behavior. They argued that Dahmer was unable to control his actions due to his mental state and that he should be committed to a mental institution, rather than imprisoned. Despite the defense's arguments, the jury found Dahmer guilty of 15 counts of murder and sentenced him to 15 consecutive life terms in prison. The trial sparked a national conversation about mental illness and its role in violent behavior, as well as the importance of early intervention and detection of warning signs. Looking back on Dahmer's trial, it is clear that his crimes were heinous and deserving of punishment. However, the trial also highlighted the complexities of mental illness and its role in violent behavior. It is important to recognize the importance of early intervention and support in addressing mental health issues, and to provide appropriate resources and treatment to prevent violent behavior from escalating. The aftermath of Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes was felt by many, including his victims' families, the community of Milwaukee, and the nation as a whole. The details of Dahmer's murders were horrific, and the fact that he had evaded detection for so long was deeply troubling. The impact of Dahmer's crimes on his victims' families was profound. They were left to grieve for their loved ones and to grapple with the knowledge that their deaths were the result of a serial killer's actions. Many struggled with feelings of guilt and regret, wondering if they could have done more to prevent their loved ones' deaths. The community of Milwaukee was also deeply affected by Dahmer's crimes. The fact that such horrific acts could take place in their city was a source of shock and disbelief. The case also highlighted issues of homophobia and discrimination, as many of Dahmer's victims were young gay men who had been marginalized and stigmatized by society. The media coverage of Dahmer's crimes was extensive, with many outlets providing sensationalized and graphic accounts of his murders. This coverage sparked a national conversation about serial killers and the nature of violent behavior. It also raised questions about the role of the media in sensationalizing and exploiting violent crimes. The impact of Dahmer's crimes can still be felt today. They serve as a reminder of the importance of early intervention and detection of warning signs, as well as the need for greater support and resources for those struggling with mental health issues. They also highlight the importance of addressing issues of discrimination and marginalization, and the need to create a more inclusive and accepting society. Looking back on the aftermath of Dahmer's crimes, it is clear that they had a profound impact on many people. However, they also serve as a call to action, urging us to work towards a society that is more compassionate, understanding, and supportive. The legacy of Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes is complex and controversial. On one hand, his actions were undeniably heinous and deserving of punishment. On the other hand, his case raised important questions about mental illness, criminal justice, and societal attitudes towards marginalized communities. One of the most controversial aspects of Dahmer's case was his diagnosis of borderline personality disorder and his subsequent treatment by mental health professionals. Some critics argued that Dahmer should have been recognized as a danger to himself and others and committed to a mental institution, while others argued that he was able to manipulate his mental health professionals and avoid being held accountable for his crimes. Another controversy surrounding Dahmer's case was his trial and sentencing. Some critics argued that the media coverage and public perception of the case had influenced the jury's decision, and that Dahmer's status as a white, middle-class man had afforded him more leniency than he deserved. Others argued that his sentence of 15 consecutive life terms was excessive and inhumane. Dahmer's case also raised important questions about the treatment of marginalized communities, particularly the LGBTQ+ community. Many of Dahmer's victims were young gay men who had been marginalized and stigmatized by society. Critics argued that Dahmer's actions were symptomatic of a larger culture of violence and discrimination against LGBTQ+ individuals. Despite the controversies surrounding Dahmer's case, his crimes had a profound impact on criminal justice and mental health policies. His case helped to raise awareness about the need for greater support and resources for those struggling with mental health issues, as well as the importance of early intervention and detection of warning signs. It also highlighted the need to address issues of discrimination and marginalization in our society. Looking back on the legacy of Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes, it is clear that they continue to provoke controversy and debate. However, they also serve as a reminder of the importance of addressing issues of mental health, discrimination, and marginalization in our society, and of the need to work towards a more compassionate and just world. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most notorious in the history of American crime. It has been the subject of countless books, movies, and documentaries, and continues to fascinate and horrify people to this day. However, the legacy of Dahmer's crimes extends far beyond the details of his gruesome acts. One of the most important lessons we can learn from Dahmer's case is the importance of early intervention and detection of warning signs. Dahmer exhibited a variety of concerning behaviors throughout his life, from his fascination with roadkill to his escalating violence towards others. However, these warning signs were often overlooked or dismissed, allowing him to continue his crimes for years. Another lesson we can learn from Dahmer's case is the importance of mental health resources and support. Dahmer struggled with addiction, social isolation, and violent fantasies throughout his life, and these issues were compounded by his mental illness. However, he was unable to access the resources and support he needed to address these issues in a healthy way. Dahmer's case also highlights the importance of addressing issues of discrimination and marginalization in our society. Many of his victims were young gay men who had been stigmatized and marginalized by society, and their deaths were a tragic reminder of the impact of hate and discrimination. Ultimately, the case of Jeffrey Dahmer is a reminder of the need for greater compassion, understanding, and support in our society. We must work to identify and address warning signs of violent behavior, provide resources and support for those struggling with mental health issues, and create a more inclusive and accepting society for all individuals. As we reflect on Dahmer's crimes and their legacy, we must remember the victims and their families, and work towards a world in which such horrific acts are never repeated.
Thank you for watching our video today. We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and engaging. We believe that true crime stories have the power to shed light on important issues and spark conversations that can lead to positive change. We encourage you to continue to explore the world of true crime, to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, and to seek out knowledge and understanding. We appreciate your support and value your feedback. Please let us know what you thought of this video in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and stay safe.